Thank you for joining our monthly segment, Missing, Murdered, Mysterious, where we highlight unsolved cases of missing people, homicides, and mysterious deaths with a focus on BIPOC in North America. Today's case focuses on a few tragic stories of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Vancouver's notorious downtown Eastside.
We've learned a Canadian woman is missing.
Family says they have done all that was in their hands to find their loved one.
I just want him to make it home to us.
Pleading for help from the public to find their family member.
And the family is still waiting for some answers.
The car was empty, the motor still running, the driver's side door was open.
The horrific crimes of Robert Pickton, committed between 1995 and 2001, continued to echo through the streets of British Columbia, in particular Vancouver's downtown Eastside. Pickton's case was the largest serial killer investigation in Canadian history. During this 6-year crime span, Pickton prowled Vancouver's downtown streets, looking for vulnerable women to take back to his pig farm in Port Coquitlam. Many of the women he targeted were sex workers, dealing with mental illnesses and addictions, and the majority of his victims were Indigenous women. In 2001, Pickton was charged with murdering 26 women, though he later bragged about killing 49 in total. In 2007, he was convicted on 6 charges and sentenced to life in prison, where he recently died a slow, painful death. Now, this episode isn't about Robert Pickton. It's actually about the very important issue at the center of the story of his heinous crimes, which involves a larger, far-reaching issue specific to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. In 2010, a provincial inquiry called Missing Women Commissions of Inquiry, or MWCI, was initiated to look into and make findings of fact respecting the conduct of the investigations conducted by Vancouver Police in relation to the Pickton case, and how a vulnerable population of women can be whisked away from the bustling streets, never to be inquired about or looked for again by police, despite desperate pleas from concerned families and friends. The inquiry was led by former BC Supreme Court Justice Wally Opal, a revered spearhead in Canadian law. The MWCI Council operated for 2 years before presenting their findings in May 2012. In a nutshell, the MWCI Council reviewed the investigative work by Vancouver Police and interviewed family members of Pickton's victims and others impacted by the case. Upon completion of the inquiry, the MWCI Commission found blatant failures by Vancouver Police that led to a, quote, tragedy of epic proportions. Opal, the commissioner of the council, summarized over 80 recommendations for change, described as, quote, lessons to be learned from the experiences of families about women's safety, justice system responses to reports of missing persons, and steps that could be taken to ease the family's pain and help with their healing process, unquote. The report with the full list of recommendations is linked in our show notes if you're interested in reading it. The Vancouver Police Department has said they've updated their processes to better align with recommendations from inquiries such as the one led by Opal, but despite implementing changes like better communication and better record-keeping systems, glaring holes continue to shine through the VPD's investigative procedures when handling the cases of specifically Indigenous people, as seen in a handful of stories I'm about to tell you. These stories are about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Vancouver's downtown Eastside in the months after reform was believed to be happening since the MWCI had started their inquiry. By the time they made their findings and over 80 recommendations public 2 years later, and the VPD said their investigative and reporting procedures would be updated, Indigenous women were still being targeted. Telling these stories is intended to highlight some of the issues that still exist, despite government inquiries and reform to police reporting and investigative processes. Issues that specifically leave the families of the missing and murdered people feeling absolutely alone and often very helpless. Issues that show major change in action are still needed, and it's important to continue educating on the matter and telling these stories. Ashley Nicole Laurie Machiskinik of Kawakatusi First Nation was born November 20th, 1987 in Saskatchewan. As a child, she moved to British Columbia with her family and she was described as beautiful, friendly, shy, and kind. But at just 22 years old, her young life was cut tragically short. On September 15th, 2010, Ashley died after falling from the Regent Hotel's fifth-story window in Vancouver's downtown Eastside. Seconds after Ashley crashed to the ground, witnesses saw someone toss her shoes out the same window where she fell from. Despite this, Vancouver police ruled her death a suicide, but Michiskinik's friends say she was murdered, likely over a small drug debt. The idea that she was murdered over a drug debt didn't come from thin air. There was a growing suspicion that female drug mules and addicts who failed to pay their debts were being thrown out of windows to their deaths over as little as $50 as a warning to others to pay up, and it was believed that the recent victim at the time was Ashley. As outlined in an editorial in The Province, a Vancouver-based newspaper, Dave Dixon, a retired member of the Vancouver Police with many decades of experience in the area, was among those who did not believe the deaths were suicides, including Ashley's. Quote, "I've known Ashley since she was 15. She was an attractive, quiet young woman, and there's absolutely no way on earth that she committed suicide by jumping out of a fifth-floor window of the Regent Hotel." Vancouver Police spokesman Constable Lindsay Houghton called the suggestion that Ashley was murdered, quote, "a tragic rumor that has not been corroborated, a case of what appears after investigation to be someone taking their own life," unquote. To quote the editorial, "He may be right, and certainly there isn't any direct evidence, but the comments sound uncomfortably like police department statements in the 1990s when Robert Pickton's victims were disappearing, that there was no evidence that a serial killer was operating in the Eastside," unquote. Unsurprisingly, Ashley's violent death sparked anger and allegations that police were still ignoring the murder of Indigenous women in this notorious section of the city. Ashley's death occurred just 4 months after the MWCI released their report publicly, and it was an opportune moment for the police to prove they were serious about the report and begin implementation of recommendations made by Wally Opal. But instead, VPD immediately chalked up Ashley's death as a suicide. Carol Martin, an Indigenous woman herself who worked at a downtown Eastside women's center, was by Ashley's side as she took her last breath. Carol said the downtown Eastside was rife with drug dealers and that women, predominantly First Nations women, are the primary victims of violence. Quote, "Our women are the mules. They are sex trade workers. They're drug addicted. They're holding or selling drugs for dealers, and they're paying with their lives, now more than ever," unquote. Others who were present when Ashley was killed were equally angry. One man was quoted saying, "Ashley was a beautiful, good-spirited person, and she did not deserve what those assholes did to her, throwing her out in the alley like a bag of garbage. I was right here when her body hit the street with a sound I'll never forget. Are we intelligent people? Give me a break. Ashley didn't commit suicide by jumping out of the Regent Hotel. She was thrown out to send a message to pay up your drug debts or else. Those dealers are just laughing. They know the police aren't going to be able to prove anything down here." On Monday, October 4th, 2010, a vigil was held by Sisters in Spirits March to remember missing and murdered First Nations, Inuit, and Métis women across the country. Carol Martin said, quote, "Where are we going to get our answers from? When is society going to start changing its attitude about who we are as First Nations women?" Unquote. After the vigil, a crowd marched to the VPD's Main Street headquarters, demanding an investigation into Ashley's death. The march didn't end with police taking their demands to meet the VPD chief Jim Chu seriously, but instead ended with 3 participants being arrested after they refused to leave. They were held for 5 hours and faced charges of assault by trespassing. Among those arrested was Angela Marie McDougall, Executive Director of Battered Women's Support Services. She was also a downtown Eastside activist, who at the time said she knew of 6 women in the, quote, drug-ridden community who had been thrown out of windows as punishment by drug dealers intent on collecting their debts, and was convinced Ashley was among those women. She was quoted as saying, "The rapes and the beatings are standard punishment by drug dealers. What is a little bit unusual are women's heads being shaved, and women coming out of windows. I know of about 6 in the last 2 years. They're not deaths all of the time, but to injury or death, they are thrown out of windows. We know this is a way that drug dealers deal with their debts, unquote. To clarify, when she said the last 2 years, it would have been between 2008 and 2010. And when she said women's heads are shaved, that happens when they owe as little as $30 to the dealers. And again, it's a way for dealers to send a message to others who owe them money. Angela Marie McDougall and retired VPD member Dave Dixon were just a couple of people convinced that women are being murdered by drug dealers by throwing them out of the windows of the hotel. Many activists stood alongside Angela in the march to VPD headquarters, equally convinced Ashley was one of many similar deaths. In the following days, Vancouver Police Chief Jim Chu received a wave of anger from Eastside residents about Ashley's death and the mounting violence against women by drug dealers. Less than a month later, on Monday, November 1st, 2010, Police Chief Jim Chu announced the Guardian Project, a project to help women in the downtown Eastside who face disproportionate rates of violence, injury, and death. Shortly after the announcement, the name was changed from Guardian Project to Sister Watch. Jim Chu promised Sister Watch would hold regular town hall meetings and said the project had set up a phone tip line which was staffed by, quote, female civilians trained to assist callers who are distraught, nervous, or afraid, unquote. And the phone tip line also offered anonymity to tipsters. VPD Staff Sergeant Joanne Boyle stressed Ashley's death was, quote, under active and ongoing investigation, and that the VPD had rescinded its previous declarations that her death was a suicide. VPD announced a reward of, quote, up to $10,000 for information that proves conclusively how and why Ashley fell from the window, unquote. Ashley's family welcomed news of the reward. Her step-grandmother said, quote, we all know in our hearts that Ashley would never take her own life, and we are still hoping there will be justice for her, so maybe this reward is a good thing. I know that in the city people are afraid to speak up because they're scared of the gangs and drug dealers, but if I knew about a death, I would speak up. Just because she wasn't a university student and she lived in the downtown Eastside doesn't mean her death wasn't important, unquote. Mona Woodward, Ashley's cousin, said, quote, Ashley's death brought more awareness to the community and society at large about the violence toward Aboriginal women down here, unquote. Which is absolutely true. If people didn't rally together demanding answers and resolution for Ashley's death, it's possible Sister Watch wouldn't have launched so quickly, if at all. It's likely her death would have stayed a suicide in the eyes of VPD. And it's likely the broader community wouldn't continue to speak Ashley's name. Ashley was buried in her native Saskatchewan. A celebration of her life was held Monday, September 27, 2010, at Kawakatuzi First Nation, and her funeral was held the next morning. Quote, you are loved and missed, and your memory will live on in the hearts of your family, friends, and strangers you have brought together to fight for the rights of your people, unquote. Sadly, despite Sister Watch and the awareness Ashley's case brought to the public, Ashley's case remains unresolved, and women were still being thrown to their deaths from the Regent Hotel. Nearly 1 year to the day that Ashley was thrown from the hotel window, Verna Simard plunged from the 6th floor of the Regent Hotel on Friday, September 16, 2011. The next bit is from an article in The Province by John Colburn. Darren Zinkovich hasn't stopped shaking. The 50-year-old resident of Vancouver's gritty downtown Eastside was walking along the sidewalk in the 100 block of East Hastings Street Friday evening when a woman's body fell from the 6th floor of the Regent Hotel and crashed to the ground just a few feet in front of him. Zinkovich said the moment the body fell at his feet, he called 911, but right away he knew there was nothing doctors could do. I said to them, "This person is dead. Just get over here now." Another few steps and she would have hit me. I couldn't sleep all night after that. There was brain matter everywhere, and that was going through my mind all night. It was a very traumatic thing, the sound of the body hitting the ground. As Zinkovich described the horror, a rally was taking place a half block away to protest the lack of safe housing for women in the crime-plagued neighborhood. And on Saturday, Vancouver police were asking for witnesses to come forward with information into the tragic death of 50-year-old Verna Simard. Police confirmed Simard fell from the 6th floor suite at the Regent Hotel just before 8 p.m. VPD major crime investigators spent the night interviewing witnesses and were back at the Regent Hotel Saturday in the hopes of learning more about the last moments before Simard died. VPD media liaison Constable Jana McGuinness said a man who was in the suite at the time was taken to the police station for questioning. Investigators have learned that the two were in a long-term relationship, but the man did not reside in the suite, unquote. Feels like deja vu, doesn't it? Well, that's the reality of the downtown Eastside. A constant cycle of violence, people rallying for reform. The police say they're doing what they can with the projects like Sister Watch. The exact same violence occurs. People rally. You get it. A side note, Sister Watch almost immediately showed cracks when VPD couldn't even report on how many calls the tip line received because they hadn't implemented any sort of tracking system. They were also asked if the tips led to any arrests or interrogations, but said they couldn't comment on that. And it's up to you to decide if it was for investigation integrity or because they had no idea. Advocate Angela Marie McDougall had joined Sister Watch at its inception, but has since left after becoming disillusioned. She's quoted as saying, "The committee was designed to hold the police accountable for their lackadaisical and gross failures in responding to the violence against women in the neighborhood. Sister Watch has not followed through on any of what they committed to. Police are not fanning out missing persons posters through community organizations, nor were they conducting proper investigations into missing persons in the downtown Eastside." For those who are curious about the Regent Hotel and where it stands today, like I was, I found an amazing article written by Jen St. Denis, or St. Denis, a downtown Eastside reporter for the DTES, and she details the history and the fate of the Regent and other seedy hotels in the downtown Eastside. I will link the entire article in the show notes, but here is a snippet. In the downtown Eastside, it's common to hear people voice a suspicion that bodies are buried inside the walls of the East Hastings hotels or maybe hidden under staircases. There's no evidence there are actually bodies buried inside the buildings. But a lot of bad things have happened to people in the hotels, while the people who had the power to do something about the abuse looked the other way. For the past 30 years, the elusive owners of the hotels have been the Sahota family, 3 elderly siblings who live in a mansion in Shaughnessy and never speak to the media, except to decline interview requests. Gurjal, Paul, and Parkash Sahota own a large portfolio of low-rent buildings and have a long history of failing to maintain their properties. These days, there's new hope for the Regent and Balmoral, long considered the most neglected single-room occupancy hotels in Vancouver. On December 4th, 2020, the DTES reported that land title records showed that both buildings are now owned by the City of Vancouver, a transfer quietly completed on November 13th, 2020. The news came a year after City Council took the extraordinary step of voting to expropriate the 2 hotels. The City of Vancouver intends to either renovate or redevelop the sites into low-income housing. The Balmoral will likely have to be torn down because it is so damaged, although the facade may be retained. In order to get the Sahotas to relinquish the buildings, the city agreed not to reveal the terms of the purchase. However, the Globe and Mail has reported the city paid more than $7.5 million, citing unnamed sources with knowledge of the agreement. City staff say the deal allows the city to avoid a lengthy court battle and move forward on redeveloping the buildings. The Balmoral has sat empty since 2017 and the Regent since 2018, after the City of Vancouver condemned the buildings and relocated tenants with the help of BC Housing, unquote. So that is a portion of the article, and I really recommend you read the entire article. It paints an excellent picture of the hotels, what it was like for residents who were forced to live in horrendous living conditions, the long-term health problems the buildings gave its residents, and the article even talks about this shady Sahota family and other potentially corrupt players. Again, it's linked in the show notes, and according to my searches online, the Regent today, June 2024, is currently designated as affordable single-room occupancy units. I would really appreciate it if somebody who's familiar with this area or even lives there can tell me if that's true, that it is actually operating this way, because when I go online and I look at images of it, it looks condemned. It looks horrible. And if this is actually owned by the city and this is occupancy units it's offering, that is just a whole other problem in itself. Back to the story. The cycle of violence against Indigenous women continues. The list of recommendations collects dust for the most part, and even when certain recommendations come to fruition, they are half-assed and basically pointless. One example off the top of my head is safe housing, which was mentioned a little bit earlier, the rally that was happening for the safe housing. That is a whole separate issue, but it's one of the recommendations that has come up multiple times for Indigenous people and other people who are at risk and vulnerable to have like these safe spaces to go to. So the city will be like, okay, that's something that we can easily check off our list. They check it off, but the safe housing that they're putting these people in is in these same volatile areas. It could literally be safe housing units designated inside a hotel like the Regent, where they're just as susceptible to the same crime that's been trying to escape. Like, it is a nightmare. It's just a cycle that continues. It is so frustrating. So, if you haven't already pulled your hair out, this next part might drive you to it. So let's leave the downtown Eastside of 2010 and 2011, and we'll fast forward a decade to the downtown Eastside of 2022, where Tatiana Harrison has been reported missing. Tatiana Serena Harrison was born April 11th, 2002. It has been described as beautiful, strong, and fearless. Her mother, Natasha, said Tatiana has a voice for people who suffer, or people who don't have one. She was articulate, smart, and an avid reader. She was everything a mother hopes and prays their daughters grows up to be. And it was all the more reason Natasha's heart broke, not knowing where her lovely daughter had vanished to. By all accounts, it was out of character for Tatiana to disappear and cease communication with those close to her. She had been in regular contact with her family until the end of March 2022, when she last texted Natasha from a new phone number, which pinged somewhere from the downtown Eastside. After that, communication was minimal at best with anyone, and 6 weeks later, on May 3rd, Tatiana was officially reported missing. Natasha worked her regular 9-to-5 all day, and when she was finished, she hit the streets conducting her own search for her beloved daughter. She drove around the downtown Eastside and canvassed every inch of the neighborhood, hoping to glean even the slightest bit of new information about her missing child. She felt she had to take on this endeavor alone, citing a lack of urgency shown by the VPD. She, along with the help of other concerned family, friends, and community members, followed every lead. They went to shelters, tent cities, and Natasha even paid people to allow her inside single-room occupancy hotels like the Regent and the Balmoral, looking for any sign of Tatiana. Together, thanks to their hard work, a timeline of Tatiana's movements leading up to her disappearance was established. Now, Tatiana had been living in Surrey, British Columbia, which is approximately 30 kilometers southeast of Vancouver. On February 3rd, Tatiana spoke with Surrey RCMP officers in the area of King George Boulevard and Bolivar Road, and she told them she had nowhere to stay. It was decided she would move to Vancouver, and she called her mother to tell her where she was headed to. In Vancouver, she stayed at a shelter at 875 Terminal Avenue from February 9th to the 22nd. During this period, she was often seen with an unidentified man. On March 23rd, investigators later confirmed she visited an RBC bank at Main and East Hastings Street. For reference, that's a few doors down from where the Regent Hotel is located. This was confirmed after police gained access to RBC's security footage, which showed Tatiana replacing a lost bank card and withdrawing cash from the bank machine with another or potentially the same unidentified man. It is unclear. And on our Instagram and on our website, I will post a photo of this man. The next day, March 24th, Tatiana sent her mother a text message from a new phone number. Again, unclear if this was her new phone or if she was borrowing someone else's phone to send this text message. The last confirmed sighting of Tatiana was nearly a month later, on April 22nd, when she was seen meeting a female friend at the Grand Union pub near Abbott and West Hastings Street, which, for reference, is about 3 blocks west of the RBC she visited. Alarmingly, police said Tatiana never collected her social assistance check at the end of April, and since that last confirmed sighting on April 22nd, her whereabouts remained unknown. Although it seems over those 2-ish months that she was in Vancouver, she stayed pretty much around that same area of the downtown Eastside. Natasha and her supporters did most of this legwork on their own, and Natasha forwarded any information learned to police. She felt she had to do this because precious time was lost before the VPD even took on her daughter's case. She said it took investigators more than 20 days to begin the search due to a supposed jurisdiction dilemma. Quote, Vancouver police told me they couldn't investigate because the missing persons file was being pushed to Surrey RCMP. To clarify, this is because Tatiana's last legal residential address had been in Surrey, so the Vancouver police were automatically putting it into Surrey's hands. Regardless, that is very frustrating to hear because, as we know, Tatiana had told her mother and received help from the Surrey RCMP to move to the shelter in Vancouver after leaving her residence in Surrey around February 3rd, and it shouldn't have taken nearly 3 weeks for her daughter's case to be transferred to Vancouver Police's Major Crimes Unit. There should have been better communication between the various police departments, a recommendation that was supposedly taken seriously after the inquiry conducted by MWCI. But it is very obvious whatever procedure they supposedly implemented failed or was not followed. About this jurisdiction debacle, VPD said, quote, initial findings from the investigation indicated that Tatiana was last seen in Surrey. As such, Surrey RCMP assumed conduct of the investigation. When investigators discovered evidence that Tatiana had used a bank machine in Vancouver at the end of March, Vancouver police took over the investigation, continuing to gather evidence, unquote. The evidence in question refers to the investigators finally gaining access to the security footage of Tatiana accessing her RBC bank account. During one of Natasha's solo downtown Eastside searches, she said she came across people who reported seeing Tatiana just 15 minutes earlier. She raced to call the VPD and inform them about the potential sighting, but Natasha said she waited on hold for 30 minutes. When she finally got through to an officer, she was told she had to submit tips to Surrey RCMP. Once again, the police department showcased they had absolutely no idea what was going on with Tatiana's case, and the fact that it was no longer based out of Surrey, and never even should have been. Natasha expressed feeling so alone in her search and very frustrated. For example, at the end of July, nearly 3 months since her daughter was reported missing, she was informed that Vancouver investigators had just submitted a request to access Tatiana's Snapchat account. Natasha had assumed that this was done long ago. As I mentioned, it was out of character for Tatiana to go so long without communicating with her friends and family, and they believe her failure to reach out was an indication that she was in danger. Natasha was constantly worried someone had harmed her daughter, saying, quote, she's known my phone number off by heart since she was a child. She would have reached out, unquote. This was proven when Tatiana texted her mom from that new number. She had her mother's number memorized. She could have dialed it, texted it, if she really needed to. Sadly, the feeling that Tatiana was in danger and had been hurt proved correct. And the next update received was a dreaded one when it was confirmed that Tatiana was dead. On Saturday, August 6, 2022, police confirmed that a body found in Richmond, British Columbia, 15 kilometers south of Vancouver, was that of Tatiana. VPD revealed she died from toxic fentanyl poisoning. The news she was dead wasn't even the worst part. Constable Tanya Vizintin, a spokesperson with the VPD, said that her body had actually been found on May 2nd on a yacht in a Richmond marina, the day before she was reported missing, but was only now being identified over 3 months later because the police forces, quote, missed the connection. She was only identified because on July 14th, 73 days after her body was discovered, Richmond RCMP released a sketch of the then unidentified woman. Someone saw the sketch and came forward to identify the missing Tatiana, with the woman found dead on the yacht, as the same person. This case is so hard to digest because so much time, resources, and heartache could have been saved if the police departments were in communication and sharing information. It's not like these departments are provinces away. They are all right next to each other. They're local to one another. There is no reason for these departments to be so out of touch, especially after hearing time and time again that they will work on better communication amongst themselves. That was a promise made a decade earlier that clearly failed. Stories like this, a missing loved one and the families at the helm trying to find answers, are commonplace for Indigenous families in Vancouver. Tatiana's case was just one of several involving Indigenous women reported missing in those few months in 2022 that, to this day, have no resolution. Chelsea Poorman had moved to Vancouver in July 2020 to be closer to family and mental health support after a brain injury caused by a car crash in 2014 continued to affect her. She was 24 years old when she was reported missing by her mother, Sheila Poorman, on September 7th, 2020. Chelsea had been out to dinner and then to a party the night before with her sister, before leaving alone. It took 10 days for the police to notify the public, despite them knowing about her physical and mental disabilities caused by that car crash. 2 months later, the police decided Chelsea was vulnerable and transferred her case over to the homicide unit. Her body was found April 22nd, 2022. Her mother was told 2 weeks later, despite Chelsea being easily identifiable in the same clothes she was wearing the day she went missing, as well as a scan of the metal rods in her arms. Her body had been found in the backyard of a mansion. The owner of the mansion had been out of the country for years. The police said there was insufficient evidence to suggest her death was the result of a crime, even though she was missing several fingers and part of her skull when she was found. Noelle Ellie Osoup ran away from a group home 30 kilometers away in Port Coquitlam without permission on May 12, 2021, when she was just 13 years old. They were not reported missing for 1 week. Their brothers and their uncle, who had been pushing for custody of them and their 3 brothers, hadn't been notified when they were missing, nor when the body was found. The family was never informed of anything and had only found out about Ellie's disappearance through the news. Ellie's body was discovered on May 1st, 2022, a year after their disappearance, alongside the body of a then unidentified woman. Their remains were found by building maintenance staff in an apartment at 405 Heatley Avenue, which, for reference, is 6 blocks east of the Regent Hotel. Over 2 months earlier, police had discovered the body of the unit's tenant in the same apartment and had somehow missed seeing the 2 other deceased people. After Ellie had gone missing, multiple residents of the apartment building had called the police and reported sightings of them in and around the building, but had been ignored. It took over a month for Ellie's body to be identified. Ellie's second cousin, Solomon Reese, said if Ellie was a, quote, white, upper-middle-class girl from West Vancouver, any and all resources would have been deployed to find her, but she was just another Indigenous youth in care, unquote. She's just another one is a heartbreakingly common phrase said by Indigenous people when talking about their missing or murdered loved one. It is gut-wrenching. Also, some sources had Ellie's pronouns as they, others said she when talking about them, and I mean no disrespect when I use both, and if one was wrong, I'm sorry. The investigation into Ellie's death hasn't brought any resolution yet, but the police were finally a bit more open with details, and they identified the other woman found dead with Ellie and the man found dead earlier. Unfortunately, the details are horrific, and it's left people with very scary questions.
We now know this Vancouver SRO unit, where the decomposing remains of Noelle Osoup and another woman were discovered, was occupied by Van Chung Pham, an accused rapist charged with drugging and sexually assaulting another woman in 2020 and wanted on a Canada-wide warrant when he was discovered dead himself.
There was a Canada-wide warrant that was issued as a result of the Vancouver Police investigation. The person who was subject of that warrant, the person that we believe committed these offenses, has since died.
Global News can also now report another young woman was found alive and living inside Fam's unit when officers discovered him dead on February 23rd.
She had dark hair, short dark hair, always had her head down, came out, sat out here, and then never heard anything until 3 months later.
We now know Fam, in his mid-40s, was the subject of an extensive police investigation in the months before his death, during which time Noello Soup and a woman in her 30s, Elma Anan, somehow wound up dead inside his unit too. Vancouver police finally speaking publicly on Fam and the charges against him on Thursday.
A man named Van Chung Pham was the subject of a Vancouver police investigation that started in November 2020 and resulted in a number of charges being laid.
The BC Prosecution Service confirming that, telling Global News Provincial Crown Counsel approved 4 counts against Van Chung Pham, dating from an incident on November 19th, 2020, of sexual assault, administering a drug or a stupefying agent, trafficking cocaine, and trafficking heroin. Adding, the information was abated by the Crown based on reliable information that the accused has died on March 1st, 1 week after Pham was found dead and weeks, if not months, after the deaths of Osoup and Anan. Their bodies only discovered months later on May 1st, one of them inside a recycling bin.
I've seen him answer the door and they've gone in with him. What their dealings were, I don't know.
To Chris Sears, who lived directly across from Fam's unit and lived with its overwhelming foul stench for months. Confirmation Fam had allegedly administered a stupefying agent to sexually assault a vulnerable victim, only confirmed his long-held suspicions.
I never had the smell of death, be verified to me until that door was opened and they pulled it out and said, "Oh my God, how long's he been in here for? You got to get out of here, girl." And then they took her out. Neighbors say officers visited Fam's suite multiple times in the days before his body was discovered, but they never gained entry. Fam's death is not considered suspicious, but those of Osoup and Anan, who's related to a Vancouver police officer, are. So with all 3 deceased and a major crimes investigation still open, the question is, are there other suspects?
The investigation is ongoing. There's more work to do.
I went through Pickton and I watched all my friends go missing.
A scenario haunting residents like Candace Norris, who says she met Osoup several times while she was still alive. And at just 13, only a few years older than her own daughter.
I seen that little girl in my building, It breaks my heart that the Indigenous community is screaming for help and we're still being murdered and raped and going missing.
A cycle of systemic failure and oversight and the tragic fallout we've all seen before. Sarah McDonald, Global News.
After hearing that news clip, certain conclusions can be drawn about the fate of Ellie, and it is terrifying. But like I said, Ellie's case is still unresolved, though VPD has said it's an open investigation. 25-year-old Quem Manuel-Gottfriedson's body was found on July 30th, 2022, inside a building near East Hastings Street and Hawks Avenue, 3 days after she was reported missing by family and 2 days after her missing persons posters were distributed. For reference, Quem's body was found 1 block east of the Heatley Block Hotel where Ellie Osoup had been found. Now, those were a few cases of other women and girls found dead at the same time that Tatiana was laying in a morgue unidentified and seemingly forgotten about. The reality is the list is seemingly endless. The other tragic reality is that all of these cases are unresolved. Natasha Harrison said, quote, "I hope we can reach a point in our justice system where cases like these get solved, instead of brushed under the rug because one person decides a human being doesn't deserve a proper investigation. We need to end the careless disregard for human life based on race, stigma, and class." Unquote. The major similarity amongst these stories starts with the vulnerable people at the center of them and continues all the way through, where we see how much the families, the friends, and the communities struggle for support with their missing loved one's disappearance. Law enforcement agencies like the Vancouver Police Department needs to improve the handling of missing person cases, specifically missing Indigenous women, and they should be held accountable when they fail, or continue to fail in these cases. It's important to talk about the continued work that needs to be done with their reporting and investigative procedures. More importantly, it's imperative that when supposed new and improved processes are implemented but fall short of being beneficial to the person at risk and the families looking for said person, police recognize and acknowledge their shortcomings and work on a continued basis to strive to be better. They need to learn from their previous failings, and they need to listen to the families who have been personally affected. It should be a goal of all law enforcement to aim for prevention of violent crimes or untimely deaths against vulnerable populations, to protect vulnerable women in a volatile city, to have the initiative to help families who are concerned about their missing loved one. It's been a repeated lesson learned that particular demographics are more at risk. And that should motivate to want to help and protect, not to stigmatize or worry about it after something horrible happens. Continuing an open dialogue about cases like Ashley Machiskanik, Tatiana Harrison, Chelsea Poorman, Noelle Osoup, and Quem Manuel-Gottfriedson not only keep their names and stories alive, but also serve to educate. The fight must continue because so much more still needs to be accomplished. Even though inquiries into the missing murdered Indigenous women and girls epidemic continue to happen, like the national inquiry concluded in 2019, so much work is still needed. Even after the 2019 inquiry gathered evidence from 1,500 victims and their families, and it was declared the violence against Indigenous women and girls is a genocide. This inquiry led to 231 recommendations, which span justice, health, culture, transportation, education, correctional issues, and way more, which have yet to be largely adopted after 5 years. While there are some positive legacies from the national inquiry, like improvements in collaborative policing, child welfare policies, and social safety nets to better protect women and girls, the streets aren't much safer for deeply marginalized Indigenous women and girls, and a lot of work is still needed. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Woodhouse Nepinak said, quote, "We're trying our best to make sure that the next generation of girls are not facing such horrific things in their lives. Significant and substantive action is needed now more than ever," unquote. And those words continue to ring true. Thank you for listening to this episode of Missing, Murdered, Mysterious. I know it was a whirlwind of information, sad stories, segues, but the reality is, what I have told you today is literally the tip of the iceberg. You can spend days on end diving into the downtown Eastside and find yourself falling down endless rabbit holes. You truly need a corkboard and red string to try and make sense of all of the fuckery that has happened, and sadly continues to happen in Vancouver due to, as we've discussed, poor police procedures, lack of communication between local jurisdictions, stigmas, ignorance, lack of accountability, you name it. In your spare time, I do recommend you fall down this rabbit hole, though, because it's so important to understand how far-reaching these issues are. It's not a joke or an exaggeration of the continued hardships and battles that Indigenous people face on the daily. There is a reason that when talking about the fate and untimely deaths of Indigenous women and girls, it's called an epidemic. There is a reason Indigenous representatives and advocates have called what is happening to their women and girls a genocide. And some of those reasons have been highlighted in this episode, where we've been talking about one isolated location of the country. Most of the horrors I've told you today have taken place in 4 square kilometers. Let that sink in when comparing it to the size of our country, and the fact that these are issues faced across the board by Indigenous people. Please share this episode so we can continue spreading the stories of Indigenous women and girls and the reality of how their cases are handled by law enforcement and perceived by the public. The sources used to write this episode are in the episode description, along with other resources and reading material that I've mentioned throughout. Thank you for listening to episode 11 of our Missing, Murdered, Mysterious segment, and we will see you next month for another installment.
Call it the missing white woman syndrome. If there's a missing white woman, we're going to cover that every day.
Black kids stay on the news cycle for about a day, maybe, and then they fall off the news cycle.
An epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Indigenous women face a murder rate 6 times the national average.